Get the home field advantage every time with Fairfield by Marriott, official hotel partner of the NCAA. Whether you're a student athlete working toward your championship dreams or your team's biggest fan, Fairfield by Marriott has everything you need to get ready for game day. From comfortable guest rooms to complimentary hot breakfast, Fairfield is part of the Marriott Bonvoy portfolio of hotels and official hotel partner of the NCAA. Visit fairfield.marriott.com to book your next game day stay.
Welcome into The Verge, a show which covers the Baltimore Orioles minor leagues. The Verge is part of BSL Radio. Baltimore Sports and Life is dedicated to analysis and discussion on the Orioles, Baltimore Ravens, and the University of Maryland. The site has a team of writers providing coverage of those teams and houses live streaming content weekly. Join the conversations at the message board, like BSL on Facebook, and follow BSL on Twitter.
Welcome to On the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. On the Verge is part of Baltimore Sports and Life Radio. And on tonight's episode, we're joined by a special guest as Ben Badler, senior writer of Baseball America, joins us on the podcast. Ben provides baseball analysis, prospect ranking, and scouting reports for the publication. And he was kind enough to join us tonight. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate this.
We really appreciate having you on. So, a lot of followers of minor league baseball know you for your coverage of Baseball America, and over the years that has focused a lot on the international free agent market. And in your mind, just how big of a difference is the Orioles' presence in Latin America and in the international market as a whole since Mike Elias took over compared to where it was before?
I don't even know that there's a word to describe how big of a difference it is. I mean, it's, for years, I mean, the Orioles, I mean, you had the Marlins and maybe a couple other teams that were sort of laggards getting really heavily involved in international signings. But the Orioles were just kind of on their own island in terms of just being completely out of the loop and out of the picture and a total non-factor when it came to signing amateur players of any noteworthiness from particularly from the Dominican Republic and Venezuela. You saw them dip in and sign some some Cuban free agents every now and then, and they would sign some players from Asia, and then of course they stepped on their own feet in some instances over there as well. But I mean, you can see like who's the best international prospect in like the upper levels of the minor league system right now for the Orioles. Like it just they just don't exist, and it's unfortunate because it's such a rich source of talent, and there's so many good players obviously coming out of there. I mean, you just look around the division and you see Vladdy Jr. and Wander Franco and Devers and Bogarts. and the Yankees, have done a nice job there too. So it's just totally different now that they're willing to spend. I mean, you're still, you're going to see some lag time in between when you're actually signing these players, and obviously the market moves so fast. So even when Elias came in and the ownership decided to change their their approach and they brought in Kobe Perez, these guys are doing a really good job there, but still you're operating years behind other clubs, not only in terms of just building out your own staff there as an organization, but trying to be competitive to sign the top players. The other clubs have already kind of beat you to the punch on a lot of those guys, which is why, this most recent signing class was kind of a different boat for them. And they got opportunistic in the previous signing period with guys like Samuel Basayo and Michael Hernandez when, those guys became available to sign. But now it's, the Orioles are now just like any other team internationally, whereas before it was 29 teams and then the Orioles were kind of off doing their own thing or really, just not doing much of anything.
And as fans, obviously this is new to Orioles fans, but it's tough to evaluate just how good an international signing class is outside of how much players sign for compared to other players and what little we read about from you and other outlets. So can you give us an idea of how well the Orioles did compared to other teams in this newest class?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the tough things right now is that when I started covering international players in 2008, and over the for those first few years, you would have players who would reach commitments to sign with a club before July 2nd, but it would be maybe months before July 2nd, right? So everybody's seeing these guys and evaluating these players. And they started with a bonus pool system in, I believe, 2012. And that, the deals just started getting earlier and earlier. So I've been writing about this for, close to a decade now, but it's just gotten to the point where you have clubs and players who are committing to a club 2 years plus in advance of when they're eligible to sign. And then of course MLB moved the signing date back with COVID from July 2nd to January 15th, so add another 6 months. And it's not like in the United States where all right, you have the top freshmen or even eighth graders in the country. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's just how the process works. Like, these kids commit to a college, when they're in eighth or ninth grade. And all right, well, then it's not like nobody sees a kid except for Mississippi State or Vanderbilt or wherever they're going to school. Everybody sees all these players leading up to basically the day of the draft almost. But internationally, once you commit to a team, then that player essentially stops being seen, at least in a competitive environment, consistently by the 29 other clubs, not necessarily because they're being hidden by that club. It's just, well, all right, if I already have an agreement in place with a club, why am I going to spend money going around and doing all these showcases and going to all these different academies and maybe traveling even overseas to different events when, I already have $1 million deal in place with, somebody else. So that's made it even trickier, that. And then obviously COVID makes, makes things even more challenging, both for us and obviously for clubs too, just trying to evaluate players. So it's just a situation right now where, unfortunately, it's particularly difficult to evaluate just how good an international signing class is for one team relative to another, and these guys change so much too. That's one of my favorite things is, especially in 2019 before the pandemic started, was these kids signed on July 2nd, and then they go into their team academies. So and they'll play these unofficial games against each other in what's called Tricky League or Dominican Instructional League. So more games. So just going around and seeing all those players at almost every team's class I was able to see them playing games. And it's amazing how much these players, when they're 16, 17, can change just so much in 3 months, 4 months, 8 months, or especially in some of these cases where people haven't seen them in a year or 2 years in some instances. So they grow an inch, grow 2 inches, put on 30 pounds. They start going from a 7.2 runner to a 6.7 runner. So you're seeing tool grades jumps from a full grade, 2, 3 full grades. It's just not like anything you really see from certainly from a typical AA player or a college guy, anything like that. So it's, like I was saying, it's just the difference in information on those guys. Even if you were to ask a team about another team's players, they're probably not going to have super detailed information on those guys. So it's just the reality of how challenging it is to kind of stack up one class against the other right now, especially because look, sometimes and pretty frequently, a team will tell me, hey, like we signed this guy for $300,000-$400,000 or maybe even less, and this guy might be already the best guy in our class. So things can definitely change pretty quickly when we're talking about players who are obviously, 16, 17 years old for the top guys a lot of times.
Nice. Speaking of this year's class in particular for the Orioles, what can you tell us a little bit about some of these top guys they signed? Braylon Tavera, Leandro Arias. Were you able to see some of these guys that got some of the bigger signing bonuses that Orioles fans are more familiar with right now? Have you been able to see them play? What kind of things stuck out to you with this class?
Yeah, Tavera I saw playing in the Dominican Prospect League, but again, it was like 2 years ago. Got some updated information on him, obviously, since then. But physically stood out. Really, athletic center fielder, good speed, pretty solid tools across the board. I don't know. There's like one other than maybe just the speed that really, really jumps out at you, but has a lot of things that teams prioritize as, an athletic player who can, has a good chance to stick at a premium position.
So, Orioles fans really are sort of just getting used to this process of the team being relevant during the international signing period.
Right.
But right now, what kind of looms in the background is the possibility of an international draft at some point in the future. In your opinion, are we close to that happening, or do you think that that's kind of down the road and maybe still a little bit of a hypothetical?
I think it is very likely to happen in this upcoming CBA. I think the owners want an international draft. They pushed hard for it in the last CBA. I mean, you can go back and look at, when Sandy Alderson was at MLB, and I want to say like 1992 or something, they were guaranteeing that an international draft was going to come. So I can understand why people might think, oh, well, they've been saying this forever and there still hasn't been an international draft. But I think at this point, look, the owners still want to draft, and the MLBPA pushed back last time, but then ultimately caved in on a hard spending cap. So I think the owners were pretty thrilled with that, because their primary concern was to contain their labor costs, because you had a previous system where teams were, you had a bonus pool in place, and then you had most of the league pretty much, it was not a hard cap, so you could blow past your bonus pool and just not be able to sign players for more than $300,000 for the next 2 signing periods. But teams realized, oh, well, we could just have like one big signing class, or we could sign a guy like Yohan Moncada or a Luis Robert, and we can still get pretty good players for less than $300,000 in the Dominican Republic and in Venezuela. So it wasn't much of a deterrent. But when they got that hard cap, I think the owners had to have been high-fiving each other. But they still want an international draft. I think one of the goals is to slow down the speed of these commitments that we were talking about earlier. And then the Players Association doesn't represent international amateur players, right? Their constituents or their members are the players who are on 40-man rosters. So, it's nothing particular against, Dominican or Venezuelan players. If, we've seen the same thing happen in the draft in the United States with spending restrictions getting put into place in the draft, or the way that minor league baseball players are treated and are paid. If you're not on a 40-man roster, the MLBPA is not really looking out for you. And they're going to use those players as a bargaining chip to get something in exchange for the 40-man roster players. So right now it's not a high priority for either side. I don't think, or certainly not for the MLBPA, which is why I think it's likely to come, and the union will get some, I don't know if it's going to be a big benefit or a smaller benefit in exchange, but I think it's likely to come. But there's obviously so many bigger issues that they have to work through, and I'm sure we all hope that they work through to actually come to an agreement. But I do think it's coming. I could see it coming as soon as next year. But obviously it's all to be determined by this negotiation right now.
In the last few years since Elias took over, it seems like every time he makes a trade, he gets at least one or two international prospects thrown in at the back end of a deal. How important was that for the Orioles to have them thrown in as final pieces in deals the past few years? We love Gene Pinto. We think he has a huge amount of upside. And you also have guys like Michel Dasson, Isaac De Leon, and Elia Prado. They seem to have some pretty solid upside too.
Yeah, I think it's become a more common tactic to try to poach other teams, particularly like lower level international players before they get famous or before they get to low A. Obviously, the Padres did a pretty all right job with that, right? With like Fernando Tatis Jr. or Yordan Alvarez too. Freddie Peralta was in the lower levels when the Brewers traded for him. So it's these guys who are, I mean, and sometimes it's just, all right, well, it's a far away lottery ticket. Would we rather have him or, the double A, reliever whose upside is, like probably realistic, like an up and down relief type arm. All right, well, maybe we gamble and just hope for a little bit more upside. And if it doesn't work out, not much lost here, right? But obviously, you could also hit a huge, I would say, grand slam in the case of, a Tatis Jr. or an Alvarez, somebody like that. So definitely hear from a lot of different clubs that are like, man, we had like 9 different DSL guys asked for in trades. And, you do that because you hope that the other GM or team president or whoever the ultimate decision maker is thinking, well, I don't know, like this guy's in the DSL. I'm not even sure I know who he is. I don't even know if I'm going to have a job by the time this kid ever gets to the big leagues, and I want to win now. So let's get this trade done. But I do get the sense now that teams are or GMs are more protective of those players because they don't want to be the guy that's known for trading Fernando Tatis Jr., right? So it's getting a little bit harder to pluck those guys away, but it makes sense to target those guys before they pop and get to low A and get, famous and, start populating a top 100 list. And then it's, much, much more challenging to be able to trade for somebody like that.
We are big on the belief that Gene Pinto is that next Fernando Tatis guy, but we'll see in a couple of years. One thing that we really love diving into the system is finding the hidden gems that a lot of other fans just aren't aware of. And one name that popped up in a lot of articles you wrote last year, looking back at last year's Orioles class, was this catcher by the name of Carlos Rodriguez. And that name just popped out to me. And I was curious kind of what stood out to you about Rodriguez and why you mentioned him a couple of times.
Carlos Rodriguez, and now I'm trying to because the Padres signed a Carlos Rodriguez too, so I'm trying to make sure I have my Venezuelan catcher is named Carlos Rodriguez.
Yeah, fairly generic name,
out, right? But yeah, I mean, he didn't play a ton this year, but it was kind of like a sleeper for them. Guy who sounds like his projects to stick behind the plate for them. Solid bat for a Venezuela for a catcher his age 17 or 18 years old now, 17 his first pro season. But just we just see so many catchers coming out of there. It's just pretty impressive. Like he's one of those guys where it's I don't think there's anything that you're going to see that you're going to be like, oh wow, like this is like really jumps out at you right away. But there's so many guys who are in that mold where you just look up like by the end of their career and you're like, wow, that guy played in the big leagues for like 10 years. Not saying that's necessarily the case for him. There's plenty of other players where they, just like that, end up getting released out of A ball, but he has that, the ability to stay behind the plate and a pretty solid bat for his age, where I think he's like, as you say, like a sleeper who could end up kind of sneaking up on some people as he moves up.
Are there any other players in your mind that fit that mold over the last signing class or two, especially for players that might be hitting low A or the Florida Complex League next year?
Yeah, the Orioles signed some pitchers. in some of the recent classes who I think are pretty interesting guys. And that's, especially where I think he can get some good values. Cause I mean, it's like, there's so many, I write up so many guys where it's like, oh, this guy is 88 to 91, some, feel for a breaking ball with, a lot of projection. And it just feels like you write up so many guys with that same report. And then all of a sudden, some of them ends up, popping and touching 94, and then they get stronger and they're throwing 97. So it's hard to know exactly which one of these guys are going to break out. I mean, there's certainly certain projection indicators that you can look for, but there is a lot of luck involved. So a lot of times you do see these pitchers who are just not signing for big money, who end up being pretty good. But I mean, like Raul Rangel, who they signed out of Venezuela, 6'4", just a ton of space on his body to fill out and throw harder. I think he's a pretty interesting guy. Moises Chase, another Venezuelan pitcher they signed, a right-handed pitcher who's not quite as big, but another guy with some good physical projection, attacks hitters and has pretty good feel for spinning a curveball. So it's like that, like the 2019 class and even last year, or to some extent, obviously they ended up getting Basayo and Hernandez are more premium guys, but when they were kind of working from behind on these other clubs, there's always pitching that can pop. So I think probably the pitching more so than some of the position players, or I don't exactly know who yet is going to be the one who pops from that group, but the pitching is definitely what I would be keeping an eye on from some of those recent classes from the past couple of years.
When it comes to the draft, this current regime seems to really like these college hitters. That seems to be primarily what they go after. But since we think this is probably the last time the Orioles will have this super high top 3 type of pick for at least quite a while, do you think that would lead them to consider a higher upside high school bat more than the past few years with the first pick? And who would you take if the draft was tomorrow with that?
Yeah, I think it's the one guy who jumps out to me as a high school hitter where I could see the Orioles going that route would be Termarr Johnson, a shortstop from Georgia, who is just phenomenal, pure hitter, baseball rat. Like he just, I think if you look at the Orioles picks, I mean, obviously like Adley Rutschman was kind of a no brainer, right? So like not a ton to glean from that one, but like you said, they've kind of gravitated toward those college hitters, guys who put the bat to the ball and have good approaches. Somebody like Elijah Green or Drew Jones, who are both obviously very good and if the draft is today, would go, I think, in the top 10 picks, if not the top 5 overall picks. And if some teams had the number 1 overall pick, like I think there are teams that would take each of those guys number 1 overall. But just looking at the Orioles track record and the philosophies and both of the organization and some of the, the people who are there making the decisions, I think Termarr Johnson fits the mold for them as far as what they've looked for. I mean, Johnson, it's just such good, pure bat to ball skills, just a beautiful left-handed swing. You can knock him, I guess, because he's about 5'8" and kind of a thicker body. But I mean, he probably has, if not the best left-handed power in the high school class. He's got to be top 2 or 3. I have no concerns about his power. I think he has a chance to be, upside to be a 7 power guy, and is going to get to that power a lot in games just because of how good of a hitter he is. Like I said, he does have big raw power, but it's a hit first mentality. He'll put the ball in play, good plate coverage, use the whole field. And then when he gets his pitch, he just has such phenomenal whippy bat speed to, yank the ball out of the park in out of any park. I mean, he was hitting balls to the the back of the Trop at the Perfect Game National Showcase last summer. So I think like Drew Jones and Elijah Green have big upside and a lot of really exciting athleticism and tools. But if the Orioles do go with a high school guy at one, I think Johnson would fit their mold a little bit more. And if I had the number one overall pick in the draft right now, I'd be taking Termarr too. I just love him. I think he's got a chance to be a really, really special hitter.
I'm sold.
Transitioning to kind of the system and the upper levels now, but you're known to have this affinity for short hitters players at the plate. And guys like Terrin Vavra, Connor Norby, and even newly acquired Cesar Prieto, how do they stack up against this ideal that you have in mind there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just talked about, Termarr, he kind of fits that mold. I mean, I think sometimes shorter hitters just get overlooked sometimes. I mean, Kobe Mayo, I love Kobe Mayo too, but it's easier to kind of see what jumps out about him right away. I think sometimes smaller players, you get questioned about how much power are they going to have, and it can kind of work the other way too, where, one of the most important things you can do as a hitter is to control the strike zone. And if you're 5'9", 5'10", some of these guys who are 5'10" are listed at 5'10" are really 5'8", let's be honest, like, you have a smaller strike zone. Pitchers have a narrower window where they have to come into you, and you just have less area to cover for your plate coverage compared to if you're 6'6", and if you're 6'6", you probably have really long arms. If you're 5'9", 5'10", you probably have shorter arms. I mean, there's guys like Miguel Cabrera who are big guys with short arms, and they're he's a mutant, so he's a different kind of guy, but. There are advantages to being a shorter hitter and having a shorter strike zone and, shorter levers and being more likely to, all things being equal, to have a more compact, more efficient swing. So, yeah, that's part of why I like Connor Norby. I mean, you just look at his track record at East Carolina. This guy is just a really, really good hitter. I really like that pick for the Orioles last year. It's just a good swing, a ton of barrels in games. He knows the strike zone, good pitch recognition. Don't know that he's going to have like a ton of power, but I think he fits in as a second baseman who's going to hit a lot and get on base at a really strong clip. So I think that's like I said, I really like that pick for them. I think he's going to be one of the better picks from that second round, I think.
So we asked ourselves this question on the show recently, and I'll pose it to you now. Who has the highest floor and the highest ceiling out of the group of Norby, Vavra, and Prieto?
Let's see. Norby, Vavra, and Prieto. I mean, I guess you might say floor just for Vavra, just with him being so advanced. Or just being so much closer, I should say, to the big leagues right now. I still think I think the highest of Connor Norby of that group. So I think he probably has the most upside. Maybe you could argue floor. I think he's going to move pretty quickly, or at least could move if the Orioles want to be aggressive with him pretty quickly through the system. I could see him certainly finishing the year in Double-A and being in position to, make an impact or at least reach the big leagues by 2023. So I'd go upside Norby, maybe floor Vavra, just because he is so much closer. But I think it's close between the two of them.
How rare is it for a team to have the best position player prospect and the best pitching prospect at the same time? And considering health and getting adjusted to the majors in 2022, is something like that something that could help turn things around a little bit faster at the major league level for the Orioles? Because we're dying for that to happen.
Yeah, I guess Ohtani doesn't count, right? But although we didn't have him number one at the time. It's a good. I don't know. We probably should look it up because it's pretty impressive that the Orioles have between Adley and Grayson. I mean, it certainly was it was not like a slam dunk decision for us to put Adley Rutschman number one. I did think he was number one. I'm not just telling you guys that because I'm on an Orioles podcast. Like I really did think, his ability. Look, the conversation was between him, Julio Rodriguez of the Mariners, and Bobby Witt Jr. of the Royals. Bobby Witt Jr., a shortstop with power and really good athlete, and has just breezed through the minor leagues. So premium position shortstop who could hit 40 plus home runs is pretty exciting. So is Julio Rodriguez, who's maybe the best combination of hit, on base and power in the minor leagues, and also is a really good athlete too, and has played some center field, but really is more of a corner outfielder, but could be 400 plus on base and another 40 plus home run guy with good defense in right field. Whereas Rutschman, to me, is the risk, or the knock on him is just it's kind of it's a benefit and a drawback where, all right, he is a catcher, so he plays the most valuable position, but he's also just probably not going to play as many games regularly compared to Julio Rodriguez or Bobby Witt Jr. because you can't just throw a guy behind the plate for 162 games a year. So that's part of it. But I just thought, this guy is like the perfect catching prospect. Almost. It's, I'm sure Orioles fans have kind of heard that maybe before. So maybe there's some hesitancy there, but man, just switch hitting catcher who gets really good reviews defensively. And then obviously offensively, I think it could be like a switch hitting Buster Posey type of career if everything goes right for him, where could be a plus hitter who does a great job of controlling the strike zone and hits for power too. So he's exciting. But then Grayson Rodriguez has just freakish stuff. Again, there was a conversation out, between him and Shane Baz with the Rays, and to some extent, I think George Kirby belongs in that conversation too with the Mariners. But even when we're just talking about it with a lot of scouts and pro scouting directors and other front office folks around the league that we just did within our staff, it was pretty consistent to those other guys are good, and there's definitely a debate to be had, but a lot of I'd say the strong consensus seems to be leaning toward Grayson Rodriguez because it's just the most complete arsenal, I think, of any of those guys. Shane Baz has really, really good stuff, and give him a ton of credit for the way he's able to throw a lot more strikes this past year. But I think Grayson Rodriguez has an even deeper repertoire, throwing 100 miles an hour, just like a wipeout slider, a really good changeup too, a curveball that really works for him too. So it's, you got 4 pitches that can miss bats. So if on any given day, if the changeup isn't working as well today, you can go to the slider more or vice versa. So he just has so many different weapons to miss bats, a track record of throwing strikes and just racking up a ton of strikeouts. So usually I'm more conservative on pitchers, but I really do think, if he shows he has the durability to, hold up 180 plus innings for a full season, I think he really does have the upside to be a number one type starter.
Nice. I'm sure a lot of Orioles fans just like to hear you keep talking about those two guys for an hour and a half.
I could keep going on Grayson and Adley. Those guys are special.
Yeah. And DL Hall too. I mean, you and Chris on your own podcast, the hype you guys had for DL Hall was comforting to hear, especially after his injury last year. But, looking at something that we've noticed, the Orioles aren't as deep as the Rays. They may not be as deep as some of these other farm systems out there, but we put together our own top 30, expanded to 50. And like, we like the depth that Mike Elias is putting together here. But is that important to have, whether it be for future trades or just the cream rising to the top, or does it really come down to Adley, Grayson, DL Hall living to their future projections?
I mean, the majority of the value that is going to drive the value of the farm system and is going to have an impact at the major league level is going to be, a guy like Adley or Grayson Rodriguez. Like, there's no amount of like depth of prospects. Like, if another team came to you and said, "Hey, we'll give you, our number 7 and 12 and 14 and 19 and 32 and 37 prospects and give us Grayson Rodriguez," you'd be like, no, that's not, we're not doing that. That's like, we have an, potential number one starter. We have, Adley Rushman, a potential franchise catcher right here. I mean, the value just historically of, particularly on the position side. I mean, I was going to say the value of a top 25 overall prospect in baseball, particularly a position prospect, is extremely, is just an extremely strong track record. Not because we're so smart at Baseball America or anything like that. I'm sure you could look at anybody else's list and see the same thing. Because all right, those are just like the obvious guys, right? That pretty much everybody is going to have there. And in particular, if you look at the track record of like the top, the number one prospect in the game or top 3 guys, I mean, you get certainly, you have some whiffs in there, but you also have, Hall of Famers in there or guys who, should be in the Hall of Fame in some cases. So, yeah, I mean, those really top elite guys drive the value of the farm system, but yeah, having that depth too is important, because you will have guys pop up from, the lower levels or guys who, maybe just get overlooked for whatever reason. Maybe they're not like the toolsiest guys in the world, but they perform and they hit, and maybe they have some questions on the profile, but, they end up kind of being sneaky good big leaguers. So the depth of the system is important too, to go with those really elite top high end guys. And that's where I think having an international program that's, just having an international program is going to have a major impact on that. Cause you can see like the upper levels of the system, like we were saying before, you just don't have international prospects there. Because for years the Orioles were just neglecting the international market. So the depth of players from Latin America is really thin at the upper levels. So, it takes time, right? Like the main class, the takeover classes for, Kobe Perez when he took over was 2019. So all those guys are pretty much still in rookie ball right now. So it's going to take some time. Those, years where the Orioles were ignoring Latin America are going to continue to hurt them for their prospect depth. But, I'm sure we're going to see that change over the next few years as these guys start to, make their way up the system and you see some more depth that way.
Sometimes you see comments about the Orioles player development system that are about their approach to the plate, where they really focus on increasing the walk rate last year, focus on exit velocity, power projection. Is this something that maybe the Orioles are a little bit unique in their hitting program, or is this an area that a lot of teams are focusing right now?
Yeah, I think it's, there's other teams certainly with similar approaches. I mean, a lot of this, the way that you teach it and the way that you structure it and the way that you, the way that you speak to players about it, the way you organize your coaching staff, your player development staff around it, some of the different techniques that you use for players or the data that you choose to show them or how you choose to communicate that is different. But I mean, a lot of it goes back to like, Ted Williams and then probably even before him about just getting a good pitch to hit. Right. So, a lot of these teams, I think, have this similar core philosophies about hitting. Now, I do think there are some teams that, other clubs that maybe care less about strikeouts and are trying to get guys to, pull the ball in the air more, that kind of stuff. So there's definitely different philosophies out there. But like you said, I think the Orioles definitely, both in terms of the players that they target through scouting, through their acquisitions at the amateur or professional level too, through trades, they're looking for guys who make a lot of contact, who are not chasing pitches out of the zone, make good decisions with the pitches that they choose to swing that, and they try to drill down on that in their player in their player development approach as well.
Just a couple more questions. As we look ahead at possible breakout candidates this year, what are your thoughts on the previously mentioned Kobe Mayo in his 6'5" power frame?
Yeah, I think he's one of the better breakout candidates really in all of the minor leagues. I just wish he was healthy for all of last year. He's 2020 draft pick out of high school, obviously like a big bonus over slot guy in the fourth round. And I think they just kind of held him back in the complex league in part from like a knee issue, I think it was that he had. And you'd still see some of that, sounded like on defense, but man, offensively, this guy was crushing it. But between the complex league and then when he got bumped up to Delmarva too. So, big raw power from him and, some swing and miss, but not a ton for a guy who's 6'5", where, that would be your concern on somebody like him, particularly coming out of high school. So he actually does a pretty good job of keeping the strikeouts to a pretty manageable level for a pretty big, long levered guy. Does have a pretty good approach too. So kind of a smaller-ish sample size from him. A 2020 high school player who spent about half of his debut at least in the complex league. So you do want to see him do it at a higher level, and you started to see him do that. But certainly a guy where a lot of the arrows are pointing in the right direction. So some risk just because he is so big, he maybe ends up at first base. But I mean, first baseman out of MASH, but I think he will. I'd love to see him be able to stay at third base. Obviously, that would make him even more valuable. But he has a type of offensive upside where even if it does end up being first base, he might be able to handle it over there too.
Definitely super excited about Mayo's potential. But another guy that I think Orioles fans are becoming a little bit more and more excited about is Jordan Westburg. And from some of the companion pieces that came out over at Baseball America to the top 100 list, it seems like Westburg is going to be the next Oriole to crack y'all's top 100 list. He's got a full year under his belt, 3 levels. What does his outlook look like at this point?
Yeah, definitely a lot of guys internally at BA were pretty high on him. So we had him, 6th in the Orioles system coming in. And I think we have 5 Orioles on our top 100 right now. So I think he's kind of sneaking up on that conversation of guys who could pop in there next. But yeah, I mean, shortstop with plus speed, like you talked about, pretty good track record. Maybe scuffled a little bit when he got to Double-A, but otherwise a pretty good track record. Even just going back to Mississippi State of hitting, putting the bat to the ball. I think there's some sneaky power in there. Maybe I don't think he's going to be like a big power guy, but he does have some strength to him. But I think it's probably more of a hit over power guy who relies on contact and making good decisions at the plate and being able to put the ball in play, get on base at a pretty good clip. So, I think he's certainly kind of right on that cusp of, if we went to 150, I think he'd certainly be within that range. So he's kind of putting himself close to that top 100 conversation if he, goes out and I think he probably goes back to Double-A, I should say, to start this year. And if he's off to a really good start in there, I think we'll probably see him in that top 100 pretty soon.
About a year ago this time, Heston Kjerstad was a consensus top 100 prospect among the outlets that cover the minor leagues. Obviously, his recovery from myocarditis is a big concern at this point. But if he is healthy, fully healthy and ready to go in 2022, gets a full season, and what will he have to do to work his way back into that top 100 conversation?
Yeah, that's kind of like the huge X factor in that system right now, because he was the second overall pick in the draft. I'm not saying he was the second best player in that draft. Obviously, there was some financial considerations involved there, but just hasn't played for 2 years, right? So there's such a huge wild card, because when he was healthy, he was one of the best hitters in college baseball and in the SEC, and had plus, if not plus power. So everything. If you really believe in him, you can see a middle of the order bat, but they're also didn't play in 2021. The health issue you were talking about, and really it's not like your confidence level in a guy from what you saw in college in 2020 could be the same as it would be in a normal year, because they barely played college baseball in 2020. So there's just different situations, obviously, but like somebody like him or like Royce Lewis with the Twins, dealing with an injury where he missed all the season, where it's like, you have these guys who seem like they're super talented, but it's tough to go off of information from like a couple of years ago on these guys. Riley, we're talking about it with these international players from earlier, and we've seen a lot more from, or at least at a higher level from Kjerstad, but just such a wild card, such an X factor where, there's like an outcome where we're talking, maybe by the All-Star break, and he's a top 50 prospect in baseball, but we just got to get him on the field really, and just see how he looks this year.
We could do this all night, and we can't thank you enough once more for doing this, but we'll end on this one. With Rutschman and Rodriguez highly likely to graduate from the list in the first half of the season, do the Orioles have enough firepower to maintain a steady presence near the top of the organizational list between having the first pick in every round in this upcoming draft and current players rising, or are they going to take a pretty significant step back in the next update?
I think they'll still be, I don't know if they'll be the number one system. Some of these other organizations at the top, although the Rays seem to always be up there. But yeah, it'll, I guess, hurt in quotes losing, or graduating Rutschman and probably Rodriguez as well. But like the Blue Jays, right, with like Vladdy and Bo, like that's what you want to do with the players. But like you said, having another, pick in the top of the draft and just the other high end picks that come with it and all the money that comes with it, you have, these guys won't all, be big, risers, but, you have candidates like, Colton Cowser or Westberg or Mayo, who we were talking about, who have or a Connor Norby, who have a chance to really move up, and some of them will flatline too, because that's just what happens with, with prospects. They're not all going to work out, but I suspect I don't think the Orioles are going to contend for a World Series trophy this year. So I suspect they're probably going to be in a position where they're going to be trading for prospects again come the trade deadline. So you'll probably see some more prospects coming into the organization that way. So, I think we'll still see. My bet with the Orioles, I would say conservatively, would still be a top 10 system in baseball when we're, hopefully having this conversation again next year. And I would say there's a pretty good chance they'll still be a top 5 system in the game too.
Well, Ben, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. Before you sign off, just let our listeners know what you're working on and where they can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, we just came out with our top 100 prospects at Baseball America. We got the prospect handbook for sale. So if you go to baseballamerica.com, you get the top 30 or really the top 40 prospects in each organization. So if you buy the handbook, we like to give you some 10 bonus names and bonus reports through there that aren't just on the website. So yeah, I mean, it's, the lockout sucks. I'm definitely anti-lockout, but man, there's just so much in baseball going on right now between college baseball starting, all of our prospect coverage, minor league baseball. These guys are still going to play. Not the 40-man guys. Maybe right away it'll be a little bit awkward for them, but there's a ton of prospects. We're still keeping track of international signings, and then obviously the draft. I mean, Tamar Johnson's still going to be playing baseball. He's not locked out. We're going to be covering all these guys. So it's just a fun time of year where, obviously the major leagues are in a little bit of a lull right now as far as action there. But if you're following prospects, we definitely appreciate everybody following along at Baseball America with all the coverage we're cranking out right now.
Well, Ben, thank you again. So we really appreciate your insight and for you joining us tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we feel like having options like video podcasts and Q&A lets us be more creative on another level. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Welcome to On the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Philn and Nick Stevens. We're coming to you live on Monday night for those watching the live stream, but last week we did an interview with Ben Badler of Baseball America, which will be part of tonight's episode when it is released on whichever platforms you listen to your podcast. So be sure to check that out probably either later tonight, so later Monday night or early on Tuesday to see the full episode, including Ben's interview, where we discussed the Orioles' latest international signing efforts, got into the depth of their farm system, and even talked a little bit about the 2022 draft and who the Orioles might take with that first overall pick. We really appreciate Ben coming on the show. He gave us some excellent insight. And I'll just start with Nick. Coming off that interview, what are your thoughts really about the international efforts as you hear them from Ben Badler about how they've changed since Mike Elias and Kobe Perez took over?
Yeah, he didn't really have a word to describe the change, right, that's taken place in the system. It was really cool to hear his perspective, someone that's so well connected on the international side of things. I just think the one point specifically that really stood out, and I hope people heard this point loud and clear. If not, I want to reiterate it, that when we asked him about who are some of the sleepers in the system, talking about some of the depth as far as international talent is concerned, he talked about the pitching, and he highlighted a lot of pitchers, and he seemed really intrigued by some of the young international pitching prospects the Orioles have, which I thoroughly enjoyed to hear him talk about that and highlight that. So it's almost like there might actually be some pitching depth in the system, something about a cupboard. But yeah, fantastic interview. Really loved having Ben on, and hopefully we can get him on again to talk about the system, especially as we continue to go deeper and deeper down the international hole here.
Yeah, honestly, it was probably one of the most insightful interviews I think we've done. I greatly enjoyed it. Hopefully everyone checks it out. We'll get it out in the podcast tomorrow and on YouTube later this week. But for me, the big thing that stood out was I now have a firm pick of who I want the Orioles to take at 1-1, whereas going into the interview, I was like, I could see it being any of these 6. No, I know who I want now, and I'm sure you'll know who that is since you're probably just got done listening to it. But Tamar Johnson, let's go.
Yeah, Ben definitely increased my enthusiasm for Tamar Johnson there. And it does feel like that rare mixture of skill set, 70 hit tool, potential 70 power, and a good defender somewhere on either side of the second base bag. I'm very excited to see what Johnson does this spring to possibly improve his draft stock. So definitely on my radar. Going back to the international efforts, I thought he had the most nuanced perspective I've heard in the last few years on how the international efforts from the Orioles have evolved, which is that they are still paying the price to an extent for the lack of activity they had for a long time, by the fact that there's not a lot of depth out of the international markets towards the top of the farm system. But when you get to the bottom, you start to see a lot more. And, as this, the organization progresses over the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see those players rise towards the top of the farm system. And this is a Pete that we've made a few times in a new year, and I'll make it again. Really watch Delmarva this season, because I think that's going to be your first big taste of players like Raul Rangel, Misael Deson, Moises Chase, Moises Ramirez. So Delmarva this year, I think, is going to be a sign of things to come for the Orioles.
Yeah, I think we have a question about that later on, and we can really dive into just how much that international flavor is going to be in Delmarva, at least to begin the year, and hopefully move up to Aberdeen as the season goes on.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Orioles fans who pay attention to this understand that this is only year 3. So when these kids are signing so young, you're making those connections when they're 13, 14 years old. We had Kobe Perez on. He was talking about Thomas Sosa, how they connected when he was 13 years old. This is unfortunately, we don't know a lot of the dark side that goes on that side of the baseball, but it's going to take the Orioles a couple more years before they really rein in those top level elite international prospects. But right now, I think what you're seeing is this system really trusts their international scouts and finding those diamonds in the rough, that maybe they're only going to cost $150,000, but can they develop that Raul Rangel? Can they develop that type of pitcher and turn him into a top 30 prospect? And so far, I think this year at least is going to answer a lot of those questions about how they can develop those kind of players, because like you mentioned, a lot of them are going to be stateside and full season ball this year for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we really appreciated Ben's insight. We thank him again for coming on the show. And usually we take some time out during all of our episodes to welcome new members of our Patreon community, which we have here for On the Verge. We appreciate their support, and we're going to shout out our new members. I'll turn that over to Bob, as well as a returning member, I believe.
Yeah, welcome back, Brandon Stoneberg. Nice to have you back in the fold. We also have Kenneth DiPietro as a new patron, and Keith Mayo. Last name sounds familiar, but I'm sure it's no relation whatsoever.
Well, welcome to the new members of our community, and welcome back, Brandon. We appreciate your support. We'll move in now to listener questions. We've been pushing this out there for the last week or so as a complement to our interview with Ben Badler. And we'll start off with one of the points that Ben Badler brought up, which is Tamar Johnson is the number 1 pick. We have a good question here from a listener named Logan. Did you guys have a prospect over the past few years that you were all in on, but were disappointed the Orioles didn't take him when they could have? And I'll start with Bob on this.
I had a hard time coming up with this just because, honestly, as much as I can rag on the Orioles, drafting and player development over the past 10, 20 years, they honestly have taken a lot of the guys that I wanted. I was worried they weren't going to take Matt Wieters. They took Matt Wieters. I was worried they wouldn't take Manny Machado. They took Manny Machado. Same with Dylan Bundy. I wanted Kevin Gausman at the time. Even Nick Markakis, I was excited about when that happened, even though I didn't know if he would be a pitcher or a hitter. But Matt Hobgood was definitely not the guy to take, what was it, number 4 overall or something like that. So I can't remember who I wanted, but I guarantee it wasn't Matt Hobgood. So that's what I'm going to go with.
Well, I'll jump in here because Hobgood was my answer too, and Hobgood was chosen 5th overall. And I remember actually watching the 2009 draft, and Tony Sanchez went to the Pirates to pick before that. And I knew the Orioles were not going to take Tony Sanchez, so it's like, wow, the board's wide open now. They can pretty much have their pick of players. And they went with Matt Hobgood, which felt like a reach to me at the time. And we now know that the 2009 draft was the year that the entire league missed on Mike Trout, or almost the entire league. But even if you take Mike Trout out of the equation, here's some of the players that were available to the Orioles that went in the first round. Zach Wheeler went to the Giants with the next pick. Mike Minor went 2 picks later. 3 picks later was Mike Leake. A.J. Pollock went in the middle of the first round to the Diamondbacks. Any of those players would have been great to have had. Can you imagine Mike Leake in the Orioles rotations from 2012 to 2014? Mike Minor or Zach Wheeler in the rotations at any point? Imagine just briefly if there had been an outfield of A.J. Pollock, Adam Jones, and Nick Markakis for the Orioles. It's just a lot of possibilities just got left there with that pick.
God, instead of that rotating cast of left fielders along with them, that would have been nice.
Yeah, it's something that I really enjoy doing. It kind of hurts a lot of times looking at that Matt Hobgood example specifically about what could have been when you look at old draft lists. But yeah, I can't go back that far. I was not into college baseball and the MLB draft scene up until only about 2 or 3 years ago, just because, the NFL draft, you see results instantly. You see those first round picks in the starting lineups. NBA draft, these guys can become stars within the first couple weeks of the season. And, baseball, not like that. So this is a much more recent thing for me. I can look ahead already at 2023, 2024. I've got some names that I'm already high on, watching so much college baseball last year, that I hope that there is a future marriage between them and the Orioles down the road. And so in 20 years from now, when we're still doing this podcast, hopefully, I've got some good names that I think are going to be on that list. But yeah, last year, I think if I go more recently, I can just say, I hope I don't go back a couple years from now and my answer is Khalil Watson, because I got really high on Khalil Watson last year. Sam Bachman out of Miami, Ohio. I had a weird thing here with a Mac SB Nation blog when I was writing about Mac baseball for a year, and I fell in love with Sam Bachman. Hopefully those 2 names don't come back to bite me. But yeah, college baseball is definitely a fun adventure though. And I love that we are getting more and more into this draft. Fans are getting more and more involved with the MLB draft. And it's not just those first round guys. We're going deeper and deeper and deeper. People get angry when we don't do 3 days draft recaps anymore. That's how intense this is getting. So it's fun to look back though.
Yeah, if you look at the more recent stuff, I'd say 2020, I was fine with Kjerstad, but I was kind of getting excited for the Zach Veen rumor, taking the high school outfielder number 2, but he's looking pretty good, but we'll see what Kjerstad can do this year. Moving on to the next question. It comes from Vivek, past guest of the show. Once Adley, Grayson, and even DL graduate, is there a prospect in the Orioles system that can challenge for top 10 overall in baseball? He's considering Kobe Mayo, Cowser, Gunnar Henderson. Can you guys imagine all 3 of them taking a step forward even more, ending the year in AA/AAA? Let's go with Nick.
Top 10 overall. DL Hall has been getting some of those talks, in the last couple of weeks from over at Baseball America, looking ahead. But I am going to say among that group, I'm going to say Kobe Mayo could be in that conversation. I think the national hype around him continues to grow. And when you hear national writers talk about Mayo, it's always even Ben Badler had this kind of the same reaction. There's some swing and miss in his game, so we got to see what he can do against, better pitching. But actually, he didn't strike out that much in 2021. That's exactly the point here. He's going to continue to fill out physically. There's so much more power in that bat. He's so young. If he can continue to limit the strikeouts, the ceiling is extremely high with Kobe Mayo. So, and as far as how will they end the season, I think Mayo and Cowser could end the year in AA. And I think Henderson is in AAA within a few weeks of turning 21 years old. And he turns 21 at the end of June. So,
yeah, I agree with Nick. I think that Mayo and Cowser definitely are strong candidates to end the year at AA. And Henderson could end the year at AAA. As far as top 10, I think Henderson would get there first of anyone, because Mayo right now is kind of just on the outside looking in on top 100 list, whereas Henderson's kind of falling in the middle of the pack somewhere. And I feel like a big year between AA and AAA would push him into the top 10. Whereas Mayo, I could see this time next year, he's maybe top 50 to top 75. And then 2024 is when you take that big step forward. Colton Cowser, I think it's really just going to be a matter of silencing some of the doubts about his power, because everything else is there. The home run power, I think, is a big question, but everything else is there. So those three would definitely be in the mix. And then obviously whoever the Orioles take 1-1 in 2022 is going to have to be in that conversation as well. But we're so far out from that it's hard to know who that's going to be.
Yeah, exactly. If Tamar Johnson is a 70-70 guy, I mean, he could very well compete for that top 10. But I just saw a tweet, can't remember if it was today or yesterday, from Prospects Live, who they did their Orioles top 10 or top 30 list. And Will Hofer has a quote. It was posted on, it was tweeted out from Twitter as well. They have Kobe Mayo number 6, just like us. They have great taste. And they said, this is someone that could very well be the best offensive prospect in baseball in a year's time. So they would go with Kobe Mayo there. Hard to disagree. I think Cowser, he won the distance competition at one of the instructs that they just did. So if he's adding some muscle and some power to that frame, and he can continue to hit like 330 and add 20-25 home run power, that's pretty damn good. And Gunnar, I mean, God, he's, like Nick said, he could be barely 21 and in AAA with his power. These guys could definitely make a run for that top 10 type stuff, but as long as they keep improving and, the competition between themselves pushes them to get better and better, we'll be in good hands.
Yeah. I just think with Cowser, I'm trying to figure out like how to say this best without it coming off as like cold or mean or like I'm down on him, which I'm absolutely not. I just think he's almost like too safe in a sense. Like how high is his ceiling really? I think overall he does everything really, really well. But does anything really super stand out? Is that ceiling there to push him into like a top 10? That's the thing. That's my thought of what could probably hold him back, but I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But great prospect. Another question from Vivek. Which international players do you guys believe will start the year in Delmarva? We'll start with Zach.
I've talked about this a little bit a few minutes ago, and I would also refer back to our first show of 2022 when we dug into Bob's projected rosters. I think the names we mentioned, Moises Ramirez, Moises Chase, Raul Rangel, Misael Deson, all are pretty likely to be at Delmarva to start the year. So I look for them, but I would throw Luis Ortiz's name into the mix at this point as well. Kobe Perez praised his stuff when he was on our show a couple weeks ago, and the numbers at the Florida Complex League last year don't look great because they weren't, but it was also sort of a small sample size. There was an outing in there where he was actually hit hard by the Orioles' other FCL team, and that drove the numbers up a little bit. So that's not entirely to blame, but that was part of it. So I think if there's someone that is maybe off the radar a little bit right now for a low A assignment on opening day that gets it, I would go with Luis Ortiz, a left-handed pitcher with promising stuff who, maybe the Orioles feel like is ready for that challenge.
I wrote down a list of 13 players that I think could start at Delmarva, just going through the prospects, and it's pretty exciting. You got Cesar Prieto, who I think he could probably start higher, but like we talked about last week, he might get that, like just a cup of coffee in Delmarva to get his feet wet. You got Michel Deson, Luis Ortiz, I agree with you, Zach. Steven Acevedo, chance he starts back in the FCL, but very well, depending how he looks in the spring, could start in Delmarva. Raul Rangel, Isaac De Leon, Moises Ramirez, Moises Chase, Brian Hernandez, the catcher, Davis Tavares, Isaac Bellany, Jose Cruz, and Nolberth Romero. So, I mean, let's go. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's the list. I don't have anything new to add to that list because that's pretty extensive. Juan De Los Santos, I don't know if you guys mentioned that name. He's somebody that's a big guy. I like these big bodied, broad shouldered pitchers. And Juan De Los Santos is one of those guys. I'm excited to see if we get to see him in Delmarva next year. But yeah, I was going to see is the Mad Behemoth in the chat tonight? Because Jose Cruz or Josue Cruz, I'm going to nickname him the Mad Behemoth. I know the numbers weren't great, but that guy's 6'4", 6'5". I think he's only listed like 175 when I looked, but there's no way he can add another 50, 75 pounds easy. And that swing, like when I'm watching his batting practice videos, like my wife gets concerned and I have to stop because they are beautiful swings. So I can't wait to see that swing in Delmarva.
So turning our attention now to the Major League Orioles. This comes from Logan. Do you think that Hyde is just a placeholder manager, or is he going to stick around for when we're competitive? And I'll start with Nick on this one.
I don't know. I mean, I don't really know how we're supposed to provide like an honest assessment of how Brandon Hyde's done because he's been given kind of a crap roster over these last couple of years and been put in this impossible spot. But I think guys fight for him. He fights for his guys. Literally, he will fight you for his guys. I don't think he's a long-term answer, but I'm a fan of Hyde wherever he ends up, whatever role he ends up. But I'm coming around more and more to this idea that is Buck Britton the future manager in waiting? Is that the plan? Because you have so many. He's a former player in the system, and you have so many guys like Adley Rutschman, Grayson Rodriguez, Gunnar Henderson. You have all these guys who vouch for him and speak so highly of him. Other coaches in the system who speak so highly of him. I just wonder: are we looking at a future Orioles dugout with Buck Britton, Ryan Fuller, Justin Ramsey, and some others, and bringing that magic back to Baltimore? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make. I think what they might do is give him every chance, every opportunity to be the guy. Obviously, they don't. I think it doesn't matter the last 3 years, whatever. I think starting maybe this year and next year, they'll give him just to see what he can do with these young guys coming up, see if he meshes well with the young coaches they want to bring up and the players. And maybe Buck Britton will be the bench coach at some point to kind of even get more experience in the Major League dugout. And we know Justin Ramsey will eventually be up on a Major League staff. We got Ryan Fuller already. They're going to bring in their guys. I think they're going to see how it meshes. And Buck Britton does seem like a slam dunk to be a Major League coach or manager at some point, but you never know. If it's not Brandon Hyde, they might go outside and get someone more experienced too. So I think they'll give him the chance, but it's impossible to say right now because he's basically just been managing a AAA team.
Yeah, I feel like managers really across the league have gotten harder to evaluate because of, how front office driven the game is now. But in the case of Hyde, I kind of agree with Nick. I like the fact that he fights for his players. I think he says all the right things publicly. As far as his in-game strategy, I can't tell you whether or not he's a good manager because he doesn't have a good roster to work with. He has, over the last few years, one of the worst rosters in the league to work with. So it's really hard to evaluate. I do think he'll be given some opportunity to guide this team into contention, and we'll see where that goes. I did have this thought, though, when I saw this question. I'm going to throw this out there. This is a general gauge on where baseball is right now. If Bob Melvin gets the Padres to play to the level that they should have last year, is that going to sort of maybe upend the idea of putting a new manager in charge of a team that needs to take that step forward and contend? Because he's coming in after Jace Tingler, who, lasted 2 years and completely collapsed in the second half last year.
It's actually a really good question. And that's a deep one to think about because, I know Tingler's issue with San Diego, from what I know, is that he just lost the clubhouse completely. And some of that might have been because of Eric Hosmer, but he did not have the respect of that clubhouse. And so you wonder, we've said before, the Orioles are not planning to have a championship team full of homegrown prospects, as much as some people think that's the case. But we all know that's not going to happen. They're going to bring in free agents. They're going to make those trades. So as much as it's cool to think about, could Buck Britton and Fuller and Ramsey and some of these minor league instructors form that nucleus, that coaching circle in the big leagues to mesh well with the guys coming up in the system? At the same time, is that going to work with a bunch of these veterans the Orioles bring in? Or would it be better to bring in a veteran like the Padres are doing with Bob Melvin? So it's actually a pretty interesting question. And now I'm going to follow the Padres even more next year and see how that relationship works.
Yeah, but then how far do you go? Would it be the manager, or would it be just like, hey, they had another year to gel and get experience, and that's a lot of new players brought in to play on the same team in the first year, so maybe they just had more time to, I don't know, get some clubhouse chemistry and all that stuff. So you can just go back and forth forever, but it's definitely an interesting question for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like we've also seen a trend now of managers who weren't successful the first time around being more successful. Their next stop, AJ Hinch, that happened with Gabe Kapler, did that with the Giants last year. So the manager that takes the Orioles to that next step might not be the obvious answer right now. And I'll go to a question here from Simkin Tribute. Will Buck adopt analytics with the Mets, referring to Buck Showalter? I'll get Bob's thoughts on this first.
I mean, he always talks about how, I am open-minded. I do like analytics, but I think I saw John Shepard tweet out at some point that, he likes the analytics that agree with his gut instincts, and throws out the rest. But hey, if he gets fully on board, maybe he's the guy. 4 more years, bring him home, and we'll do it again.
Even if he were to adopt the analytics, I don't think it's going to help the Mets because the Mets are the Mets. So I feel bad for him. I hope the Mets win. I want to see Buck win. I love Buck, but that's going to be a tough job for him.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
All right, let's go to another question from Justin, talking about a trade that maybe could help spring things at the major league level. Would you consider a trade centered around Gunnar Henderson to the Marlins for Sandy Alcantara, or at least maybe to take it a little bit further, would you consider trading a guy like Gunnar Henderson for a pitcher, that's not fresh, but he's got a couple years of experience, he's got some success, and he's young enough to pitch for a few more years? Let's go with Zach.
Sure. I mean, I would consider it. Alcantara's got what could turn out to be a pretty team-friendly deal with the Marlins right now. My initial reaction was to go look at Alcantara's home run fly ball rates, his xFIP, to see if maybe he was aided by playing in Marlins Park a little bit. And that really was not the case in 2021. We kind of saw the numbers neutralize a little bit. So I think what you see is what you get. I just still, in my mind, if Gunnar Henderson is what we think he could be, what his ceiling is, you don't trade that kind of player for a pitcher that has a few years under him, I don't think. But right now, I would consider it, yeah.
From an Orioles perspective, possibly. From the Marlins perspective, though, I think they just gave him that contract extension, if I read that correctly, like 5 years, $50+ million. So, yeah, it is team friendly, but the Marlins just dished out that money to him. And I didn't do a deep look at the Marlins roster, but I feel like they have to be ready to contend in the NL East. If not now, I don't know when they're going to, but I feel like that's a roster that could compete. So I don't see why they would make that move, even though they're pitching. Also, off the top of my head, I could be wrong here as well, but I feel like their pitching is also pretty deep. So if you want to look to trade for pitching, the Marlins could be a good franchise. But yeah, I think broadening it out, if trading Gunnar Henderson for a starting pitcher, an established veteran starting pitcher, I would say absolutely. But first, show me next offseason, not right now. I'm not trading Gunnar Henderson right now for a starting pitcher because what's that going to solve? But next offseason, and I haven't looked at who's possible free agents are going to be next offseason, but sign a proven veteran, a third baseman or shortstop to bring in, then sure. Then trade Gunnar Henderson for a starting pitching prospect who can be in the top 3 in a major league playoff rotation. I'm 100% fine with that, but not right now.
Yeah, I was going to make that same exact point. What is the Sandy Alcantara going to do for the Orioles right now in 2022, right? So, yeah, if I would definitely consider it, and maybe this time next year or a year and a half from now, I think that's definitely an option depending on, what's Westberg doing, how's Kobe Mayo looking. And like you said, yeah, sign someone so you're not relying on a Gunnar Henderson coming up and coming right out of the gates hot to be successful. So, yeah, I think I'm in agreement with you guys completely.
Another Patreon question from Robert says, do we have a chance at the title in AA? Bob?
Of course. I mean, let me look at our roster, projected roster. Look at this. I mean, Henderson, Ortiz, Reiser, Haskins, DL Hall, Drew Rom. That's to start the season. I mean, I don't know. I think it's going to be, look what they did last year. And it wasn't like the opening day roster for AA wasn't loaded with our top 20 talent or anything. So, yeah, I definitely think we'll be right in the mix. We got a deep, talented farm system, and a lot of the top guys are starting there. So I think so.
Yeah, the outcome of the minor leagues can be incredibly hard to predict for so many different reasons. With that being said, yeah, if I were a Bay Sox fan, I'd be feeling pretty good about the chances of my team being competitive because the opening day roster is going to be pretty good. And I think that's even if you end up in a situation where Jordan Westbrook starts at Norfolk, that's still going to be a really good team. And there's a lot of talent in Aberdeen to start next year. So they're going to have plenty of opportunities to get, players up from the lower levels that help them as, the Westbergs, the Hendersons, DL Hall, Joey Ortiz inevitably move up. There's going to be a lot of talent behind them.
Yeah, I think that early season roster is definitely going to be stacked. I would be more concerned about what does that roster look like at the end of the year, because I think a lot of the pitching staff, I was doing some like early look aheads, looking at Aberdeen's roster and where guys are at. I don't know if Bowie's going to get that Drew Rom, Jordan Westberg, Gunnar Henderson influx at the end of the year to help propel them into a championship. But, there are a lot of pitchers like Zach Peak, Brandon Young, Noah Denoyer, Jake Lyons. You're going to see a lot of those guys come up from Aberdeen to Bowie and end the year in Bowie. And I said last week, a couple weeks ago, when we were talking about the coaching assignments, Josh Conway, the new pitching coach in Bowie, I think he's going to be a star this year. And so I'm anxious to see what he can do with the pitchers on that roster. And we got the comment here, Kyle Moore is going to take this team to a championship. You have a rising head coach, manager, and Kyle Moore there as well. Title, sure. But I'm more interested to see, do guys that come up from Aberdeen take those big leaps like we saw last year when they made that jump? And I think if they do, then we've got some more future coaching studs on our hands out here in the minor leagues.
You left off one name on that pitchers that'll end the year in AA. Gene Pinto, baby. That's a match made in heaven. Title. That's it. He's going to put the foot down on the championship.
All right. If it's game 5 of the AA, what is it, AA Eastern League, whatever it is now.
Whatever they're called.
Yeah. If it's game 5 of that championship series and Gene Pinto's on the mound, it's a lock. Bowie's got the ring.
That's about as good of a prediction I think we can make right now on February 7th. So here's an interesting question from Tom. What do they do to eliminate tanking? A lottery draft. And I'll start with Bob here. So this is referring to MLB and part of the never-ending CBA discussions and the prospect of a draft lottery being instituted.
All right. So, no, I'm not the commissioner. I don't know what they're going to do. They got to do something because, I think a lottery draft will probably help. I think there's been some convoluted proposals out there as far as you can only have a top 5 pick 2 years in a row. Other than that, and small market, big market, they got to put their heads together and do something. I think it's in the best interest of both parties in this case. So I don't know.
Yeah. I kind of the same answer, Tom. I just don't know. I feel like if there was a good answer, then hopefully we still wouldn't be in this lockout February 7th. Something definitely does have to happen. I know there's talk of salary floor, but I don't think that's going to happen at all. We've mentioned before, if there's a salary floor, that just means that Jordan Lyles is going to get $25 million from a team like the Orioles who aren't prepared to compete. It's just not something I really worry about, honestly. I just want to watch baseball. I know there are big issues, and we don't want another Orioles team doing this. We don't need 8 teams because last year's All-Star break, coming out of last year's All-Star break, weren't there only 10 teams that were actually competing? The league doesn't need that, but at the same time, I have no idea how to fix this. And I think that's the issue, that players and owners don't know how to fix this either.
Yeah, based on the reports we were hearing about the CBA in recent weeks, my sense was kind of that the draft lottery is on the table and might be inevitable, but that the two sides can't agree on the scope of it. And that maybe, I'm thinking rationally, which I'm not sure that they are, but maybe rationally the thing to do would be just to put that issue off for another 5 years and revisit it when you get these more contentious points out of the way. But as far as the draft lottery goes, I was actually looking into this a little bit, and the NBA, which I don't follow, so I had to bring myself up to speed on this, but, you heard 76ers tanking, back in the previous decade. The one thing that a lot of NBA writers that I read, especially over at SI.com and The Ringer, shout out to both of them, that they thought reversed some of the trends of tanking was flattening the lottery odds, whereby the top pick or the team with the worst record didn't have the highest percentage of the top overall pick. Instead, the teams with the 3 worst records had the same odds, and the team with the worst record could fall as low as 5th in the draft. So I say that because the NBA is a sport where the draft has a much more immediate impact and where a rebuild can happen a lot faster. And in baseball, I think you're going to have to pair a draft lottery with a lot of other elements. You're going to have to pair it with eliminating service time manipulation. You're going to have to solve, the luxury tax, the salary floor, if that's even in play. There's a lot of things you're going to have to go in conjunction with it. So I think it could help, but on its own, it's not going to be part of the solution. I also don't know, given the development timetable for these players, is it realistic to get rid of a rebuild that is shorter than 3 years? I agree that 5 and 6 years is a lot, but is it realistic to cut it down to more than 3?
My only thing with the draft lottery, and there is that idea, well, if it's a lottery, you're not guaranteed. If you have the worst record, you could end up with the 4th pick in the draft. I got the 2020 draft rankings. We were talking about it before we came on the air. I got the 2020 draft results right here. And all right, so the Orioles don't get the number 2 pick. They get the number 4 pick. Oh, darn. We got Asa Lacy or, Austin Martin, which I know, knowing what we know now, that could be a different answer. But going into that 2020 draft, I would have been completely fine with those guys too. So, is that still going to deter teams from tanking?
Actually, with the 4 pick, we probably would have taken Heston Kjerstad. So
that's
what difference would it make, right? So,
that example there.
So I got the answer. It's expand the league, 32 teams, 32 team playoffs. There's no such thing as tanking anymore. That's it.
I will add, this is a programming note that Dr. Stephen Loftus is joining us next week. And I have already talked to Stephen, and one of the things we are going to discuss during his interview is the prospect of a draft lottery. And that's someone who's worked on a draft before from the inside with the Tampa Bay Rays. So I know that he'll probably have some really in-depth answers for us there.
For sure.
But that'll be good. And Sim contribute. Yeah, sorry. I was just I threw this up here because it reminded me of something I actually listened to on Ben Badler's podcast Future Projection, which everyone should check out. Is underslot strategy a factor? And they were talking about on there how with the international draft most likely coming, looks like it's going to be hard slots where if you draft this person in this slot, this is how much you pay them flat out. So, and they were talking about how that could eventually, if it shows to be successful, that could translate to the amateur draft as well. So, yeah, I think that might be something you have to do if you do a lottery, because then, like we just talked about, the Orioles would get their person pretty much no matter what because they were doing the underslot strategy, or I don't know. It's definitely a factor, I think.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, I could definitely see it as a factor.
I like this question from Hunter Davis. How would y'all rank the Orioles minor league uniforms? Let's go with Nick.
This is a question I thought a lot about because it's pretty easy, though. The Norfolk Tides green tops are my absolute favorites currently in the system right now. Nothing's going to ever match their jerseys from 20 years ago. The wavy T logo, the blue, but I know we're not going back there. So the Tides green jerseys, I love those. Buoys, the Ghost Crabs, Chesapeake Ghost Crab jerseys, those are awesome. Those are probably my number 2. The Norfolk Tides home whites with the green outline, I love those. As you can see, there's a Norfolk bias there. But I'd put them number 3. Then Norfolk jerseys again, the Parijitos de Norfolk, the orange pants got to go, but I like those jerseys. We need more Norfolk coffee jerseys. Bring those back. Then give me the Delmarva Scrapple. Put them on my list. I do like that. That's unique. Then I put Delmarva's regular jerseys and then Bowie's last. I did not put Aberdeen on my list only because I need to see him on the field first. But I think Aberdeen jerseys could land 2 or 3 on my top 5, top 10 list there.
I actually am intrigued by what Aberdeen did this offseason with their uniforms, particularly the powder puff blue. Like Nick, I want to see them on the field, but No one else in the Orioles farm system is going to do that. I think the Tides should do it with the wavy T logo. I think that would look great. But Aberdeen, for now, probably going to be the only Orioles affiliate out there wearing powder puff blue jerseys. So I want to check them out. I think Delmarva has generally done a good job mixing in orange jerseys every now and then. I like the Norfolk jerseys that Nick mentioned. And I think of the Bay Sox uniform, the orange one with buoy and black block letters is my favorite. The Shorebirds and Bay Sox uniforms to me kind of look like the Orioles uniforms of the 90s and early 2000s. They're kind of similar in that respect. But, yeah, I think that I really want to see those powder puff blue uniforms in Aberdeen in action next year.
I have to admit, Norfolk has a great batch of uniforms. I love the coffee stuff. Even their pink uniform really pops. You know, the green, the orange, it's all good. So I'll put them number one. I do think that Aberdeen blue is going to look pretty good. Those uniforms look pretty nice. And Delmarva, I don't know. It doesn't. Maybe it's just the camera angle. It doesn't look that great on minor league TV, but Bowie's got to be last. It's a little bit boring. I do like their logo, like their hat, probably the best, but just overall look is kind of bland. So, and what were they wearing? Like some kind of blue with firearms. I can't remember. When we went and saw them, they had some weird alternate uniforms on, but yeah, that's how I'd go.
Yeah, the jerseys, minor league jerseys are fun though. Definitely love talking about those. Next question, another one from Vivek. Which of the batch of sophomores do you feel like will take a step forward and be a stable rotation starter? And he throws out the name Keegan Aiken, Alex Wells, Bruce Zimmerman, Michael Bauman, Dean Kramer, and Zach Lowther. So go with Zach first.
I think Bauman has the best chance of sticking the starter in that group just because the stuff is so good. I think he needs to build his repertoire back a little bit, which is why I expect he's going to start the season at Norfolk. But I think he has the best chance of sticking in the rotation out of that group. Something tells me Aiken's going to end up in the bullpen long term. Zimmerman and Wells might trend the same way. Kramer, I really want to see a click for him as a starter, but I'm just not sure it's going to happen after last year.
I think Vivek is shortchanging Bruce Zimmerman, who did a pretty good job of being a stable rotation starter last year. Obviously, he missed some time, but I'm going to give Zimmerman a pass. And I think Bauman should still count as a freshman. I mean, what did he get? A couple games in? He's a redshirt freshman next year. So I think Alex Wells is my guy. I think he's going to take a big step forward. I think you looked at how great he pitched when he was in AAA, and it seemed like there was just like a little bit of a mental block making that jump up to the major league level. I think we're going to see him come out and really be more confident in 2022, get that pinpoint control that he's known for in the minor leagues back, and really impress some people and win a starting rotation spot out of spring training and hopefully maintain it the whole year. Aiken and Kramer, I'm not too high on. I think Kramer could still bounce. I like Kramer better as a starter still than Aiken. I think Aiken could be a decent reliever. And I think Zach Lowther will probably be like a nice 2-3 inning guy, nice swingman type. I'm not sure if he's ever going to make it into the rotation, unfortunately, but we'll see.
It's a vital question that I think the Orioles were hoping they would get more answers last year. But, I agree with Bauman. I think, fresh start with him in 2022. So I give him a pass there. I got Zimmerman at the top of my list. I wish those injuries would have happened last year. I think he's a little underrated, and I actually think he can stick in a major league rotation. And I had to be convinced, but I think he's done a good job of convincing me. Kramer, I'd rank him third, but if it's up to me, his leash is extremely short. Last season just left this bad taste in my mouth. Lowther, I put 4 on my list, but I've said for a long time, I think he belongs in the bullpen. I think he'd be more successful there. So that's where I kind of hope the Orioles put him there after they just last year was a complete loss, and that was the Orioles' fault. I'll say that over and over again. Then I put Aiken 5, whatever. And I had Alex Wells 6, and Wells is weird for me because I'm actually reverse of Bob. Like, he doesn't do it for me. He was one of my favorite pitchers to watch in the minor leagues, but when I think about Alex Wells, a major leaguer, it just doesn't do anything for me. Every time he pitches and somebody makes contact, I hold my breath and I get scared. It's gone. So I don't know. Again, I think I said this last year. Prove me wrong, Alex. And he kind of did last year, so maybe he'll do it again.
He's going to pitch till he's 45 like Jamie Moyer. You heard it here first.
Good.
So along similar lines, we have a question here from Brandon. What would you say is the best and worst case for some of the guys who struggled or were mostly absent last year? And he cites Mason McCoy, Rylan Bannon, Isaac Mattson, Zach Lothar, Yusniel Diaz, and Brett Cumberland as examples. And I'll start with Bob on this one.
Oof. Okay. I'll go in order that he lists them in. McCoy, best case scenario, half the roster gets injured in spring training and he makes it as the last man on the bench. Worst case, he gets released. Rylan Bannon, best case, I want to save something for prediction episode, but I think he has a chance to make the team out of spring training. He had so much bad luck. I just don't even know what to make of his season last year. So I think best case, he just starts hot and kind of starts the way he had in that 2-week stretch, or maybe not quite that good. And could maybe, what's his competition? Kelvin Gutierrez at third base. So maybe he starts the season in the major leagues. Worst case, he could be DFA'd in the spring. Isaac Mattson, best case, he comes back, proves that last year was kind of a blip on the radar, wins a job in the bullpen to start the season. Again, worst case, I think it's potentially he could be DFA'd. Zach Lothar wins a starting spot in the rotation in spring training. Worst case, gets knocked around a little bit, starts back in AAA. I don't think there's that bad of a case for him. Yusniel Diaz, finally healthy, has an amazing spring training, wins a job. Anthony Santander is traded, and he wins a job at the Major League roster. Worst case, he's either traded or DFA'd. And Brett Cumberland, there's no Major League catchers, right? So, if the service time manipulations are still in play, all it takes is an injury or two, and he could be on the opening day roster. Worst case, he's still Brett Cumberland. That sounded worse than I meant.
Yeah, I just think Mason McCoy is fine AAA depth piece. I don't think you're going to get much more out of him. His AAA numbers, a 74 WRC plus and a 221 batting average. I was afraid that would kind of happen when he reached that level. So I think that is best case scenario. He's AAA depth. Bannon, I think best case scenario for him is that Kelvin Gutierrez hits like $115 and the Orioles decide to move on. They realize the defense just isn't worth it. And Bannon gets his shot at third base. But I don't think he has a long leash because he's already on that 40-man roster. And are the Orioles going to keep him around to use that spot for too much longer? Diaz, I think best case scenario, he stays healthy for 2 months. Just give me 2 months. I don't think he's been able to do that in 3 years, but stay healthy April to May, hit well, and the Orioles can trade him and salvage some value because I'm not banking putting any money down on Diaz staying healthy for a full year. So if you can get 2 months, trade him. It's a win-win for everybody. Lothar, I just mentioned, future bullpen piece. Orioles didn't give an opportunity last year, and it's pretty frustrating in my opinion. Mattson, I think, is just someone who everybody stopped talking about. We were really high on Mattson. I think he was a top 30 guy or just outside of our top 30 2 years ago because he was a piece of that Bundy trade. It was closest to the major leagues. But again, he was on that Norfolk taxi squad a lot. I believe he had some personal off-the-field issues that probably set him back. More important than baseball, I think. So I think a fresh 2022 could be good for him. And Brett Cumberland, I think best case scenario is he catches on with another team, finds a home there.
Yeah, going through this group, I agree with both of you about Mason McCoy and Rylan Bannon. McCoy is good AAA depth. Bannon, if he can stay healthy and kind of regain his form offensively, I think has a shot to be at least a part-time player in the major leagues at some point early in the year. Mattson and Lothar, I'm going to kind of group together here because I do think that neither of them were able to really settle into a consistent routine last year, and that hurt their results. And though the taxi squad was necessary because of everything with the pandemic, I kind of hope it goes away this year because developmentally, I just don't know that a player going on the road for 3 to 6 days at a time, not playing in games, I don't think that's better for them than being back in AAA, at least having an opportunity for regular innings out of the bullpen or to take their turn in the rotation or, for playing time. So I kind of hope that both of them get more normal routines in 2022. With Mattson, we know that that's pitching out of the bullpen somewhere. With Lothar, I've said it time and time again, and I'll repeat it tonight. Just pick a role for him, groom him for that, and just see if he can be successful. If you think he's going to be a reliever, start working with that. Start working towards that now. If you want to see if he can stick in the rotation, I think that's a perfectly reasonable goal. put him in the rotation. Put him in rotation at Norfolk or Baltimore. But regardless, make sure he's taking the ball every 5 days and has consistent opportunities. Diaz, I'm kind of split between where Bob and Nick are on this. I guess part of me still wants to see Diaz in an Orioles uniform, but then I also know with his injury history and the fact that you now have Kyle Stowers, who is a better prospect right there lined up for right field. I think anything you get from Diaz, as long as he is healthy, is the best case scenario. Worst case scenario, he gets hurt. He battles injuries this year, and at some point during the season or shortly after the season ends, he's DFA'd. Cumberland, the catching depth of this organization right now is a lot of 4A players and Adley Rutzman, and I don't know where that leaves Cumberland. So I feel like after the lockout, to see what the Orioles do with the 40-man roster at that position probably tells us a lot about their plans for Cumberland, because how many catchers, even if Adley Rutzman starts the year in the major leagues, how many catchers are you actually going to carry at Norfolk? And would you take Brett Cumberland over any of their free agent acquisitions or Nick Sufel? I don't know.
A lot of depth. We'll see how the catching situation shakes out. But all those guys, I'm thinking probably except for Zach Lowther, I think this is it for a lot of those guys. They got one more chance. Lowther, I don't know. Again, like we've mentioned a couple of times, they don't know what they want to do with him, and it's frustrating. Another question here, Vivek, another one. What is your projection for Heston Kjerstad this year? Games, what level, batting average, on-base percentage, and home runs? Start with Zach.
I'll go somewhat, maybe it's conservative, I'm not sure, but I'll say it's going to be Delmarva and Aberdeen for his levels. I think he gets in a full season where he's healthy. As far as the specific numbers go, I don't know that I feel like I have enough right now to jump right in and say, Kjerstad's going to hit 20 home runs or he's going to hit 7. But I think that it would be, reasonable to expect some return to form with his power. I do think that I would not be surprised if we see him DH once or twice a week, just to keep him in the lineup, but reduce the wear and tear a little bit trying to come back from myocarditis. I don't know exactly how the Orioles are going to handle that. But my expectation is that he's going to have a healthy and productive year and that he'll play at multiple levels. You'll at least see him at Delmarva and Aberdeen. In the absolute best case scenario, he gets in 2 or 3 levels and ends the year at Bowie.
I do think he's going to end the year in Bowie. It might be like a Gunnar Henderson thing where it's kind of just at the tail end and just to say that he got there kind of and give him that little boost. But I'll say he plays about 115 games, bats like 270 with a 350 on base and hits 18 home runs. Specific enough for you?
I was a little lower in all those. I said 110 games between Delmarva and Aberdeen, 260 average, 330 on base percentage with 14 home runs. Why not?
Yoni wants to know, knowing what you know now, would you still take Kjerstad at 2, especially with the less than spectacular starts that Emerson Hancock, Asa Lacy, and Austin Martin have had? Nick?
I mean, I really did like Lacy coming into that draft. I still like him. But knowing what we know now, yes, I would still take Kjerstad. You just mentioned he could end the year in Bowie. I don't think that's outrageous to end with a week or 2 in Bowie. So and still be on track for a 2023 in the late 2023 or 2024 in the major leagues, if all goes right. And for me, it's look at the back end of that draft. Look at Carter Ballmer and look at Kobe Mayo. Do the Orioles get those 2 guys if they don't take Kjerstad? I don't know. So it's way, way too early. But for right now, I say yeah, still cool with it.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't do that over. I think that, Kjerstad lost last year, which is disappointing, but I still think there's real upside here. And like Nick said, that draft is, you got to put a lot of emphasis on the fact that the Orioles were able to go get Kobe Mayo and Carter Baumler, who had really strong college commitments and were hard to sign. Some teams, I guess, viewed them as unsignable, and the Orioles were able to get them. So, yeah, I would take Kjerstad again, knowing what we know now.
Yeah, especially at the top part of the draft. There's actually some more interesting names towards the bottom for me, like Jordan Walker, Cade Cavalli, Justin Foscue, Mick Abel. There's some interesting guys, but or Zach Veen or Reed Detmers, like I talked about earlier. But Max Meyer, Asa Lacy, Austin Martin, Emerson Hancock. I don't know if they're really blowing you out of the water as far as like, oh, we should have got them. So yeah, why not stick with the guy we got who hasn't even had a chance to step on the field yet?
Sure. Speaking of another trade, I actually heard this on a Mariners podcast this morning. And so I threw it out there because it made me stop and think. I don't know about you guys, but the trade proposal was Matt Brash and Justice Sheffield for Kyle Bradish. And they were Mariners guys. They thought Bradish and Brash were kind of similar in terms of like ceiling and prospect status. And so they felt like no, because you're just kind of swapping prospects. So why move on from Brash? Keep grooming your own guy there. But from an Orioles perspective, it made me stop and think, like, is that a trade you're going to think about doing? We go.
I thought about this a little bit when I saw you post this question, and I came to like the same conclusion. I'm like, Matt Brash is kind of like Kyle Bradish, but just like a year behind. So I'm like, I don't know. And the Orioles are pretty high on Bradish, as we know, as am I. So, and Justice Sheffield. I mean, no offense to the guy, but he's had some injuries and some ineffectiveness. I'd rather kind of just stick with the guys that were that way for us last year and see if they can rebound. So I'll take the Kyle Bradish that's here a year sooner and stick with him. But it's definitely an interesting question.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like from the Orioles' perspective, you would have to really want Justice Sheffield, because I don't know that there's much separation from Bradish and Brash other than what Bob mentioned, which is that Bradish is probably going to get to the major leagues a year sooner. Based off of what I've seen, I would have concerns about Sheffield moving from Seattle in the AL West to Baltimore in the AL East, and the injury history. So that's a deal I would probably pass on, but it is still an interesting hypothetical.
Yeah. I normally hate hypothetical trades so much. I refuse to come up with them. But I heard that one, and it just made me stop and think. So I thought I'd throw that out there. But I think I'd agree with you guys on there.
So this one comes from Eric Garfield. Best case scenario for Carter Baumler, and what do we expect his 2022 to look like? We need another ace. I will start with Nick here.
Best case scenario for Baumler, I think I said before that I think he takes a big leap this year. I don't know about you guys, but I had him on the back end of my top 30 just because he hasn't pitched in 2 years. No high school, no pro ball in 2020 because of the pandemic, Tommy John surgery in 2021. But you look at those pre-draft reports, and they're promising. And I think when you look at pitchers in the system, Grayson Rodriguez, DL Hall, maybe Gene Pinto, those might be the only guys with a higher ceiling. I mean, you're talking best case scenario, highest ceiling. Those could be the only guys with a higher one than Carter Baumler. So I don't know if that's bold, but I'm going to say that. So I imagine he gets eased back into things, though. A lot of starts in the FCL, probably most of the year in the FCL, maybe a cup of coffee to end in Delmarva, some 2-3 inning starts to end the year. But just like Heston Kjerstad, the Orioles are probably going to take it really easy on him, ease their way back in, ease both of these guys back in, because it's been a pretty brutal journey for both of them up to this point. So whatever we can get, I'm going to take it. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm really excited to watch Carter Baumler pitch this year.
Yeah, I have to echo most of that. I think if you're talking absolute best case scenario, it's Gene Pinto 2.0. He starts the year in the FCL, dominates, moves up to Delmarva for a handful to 10 starts, continues to dominate there, and ends the year as like a top 15, 20 prospect in the system, according to us. So, I think that's very possible. But at the very least, just be healthy and pitch the season, and his potential is pretty high. So,
exactly. I just double checked. I had Ballmer 26 on my list. I think that a season right around what Gene Pinto had last year, which was 66 2/3 innings, could be reasonable, maybe a little lower because Ballmer is coming off of Tommy John surgery and really didn't pitch in 2020. He lost, I think he only had one outing his senior season. So he really has not pitched the last 2 years. So the Orioles should take it slow with him, and I think they're going to. But I think there's a possibility that he goes to the FCL, puts together a really good start, gets some time in Delmarva, even if it is, let's say, 3 starts at the end of the year, and you're going into 2023 feeling really good about him as a guy that could move up prospect rankings quickly and who, in his first full season, might break out in a big way.
For sure. And before I ask the last question of the night, Dominic Corelli would like to know, who should the Orioles take with the first pick in 2022? Are we all in agreement?
I mean, it's only February, so I haven't picked my favorite yet. Stephen Loftus might change that next week. I definitely really enjoyed all the talk about Tamar Johnson. If he is that type of player that Ben Badler said he is, then it's hard to pass up. I will say that as much as I love the college guys, Brooks Lee, Chase DeLauder, Jace Young, Jace or Josh, whichever one is in college right now, I'm kind of really excited about the idea of the Orioles taking one of the high schoolers with this extremely high ceiling, put him in the system, and let's have some fun with him. We played it pretty safe. I've enjoyed all the college picks, but we played it safe to build up this farm system. Let's start taking some chances. Roll the dice a little bit.
Right now, I would say Tamar Johnson would be the Orioles pick and should be the Orioles pick. It is February, so my answer might change 5 times between now and the draft. But I would say Johnson, but as Nick said, a lot of high ceiling high school guys this year, plus some interesting college bats. And we'll get into this more next week when we have Stephen Loftus on. But there's really 6 names right now that I would feel okay with if the Orioles took them with the first pick.
It's Tamar Johnson. I mean, obviously, look, this is with what we know now. Obviously, the seasons haven't even started. College baseball starts this coming weekend or next weekend. So clearly things can change in a heartbeat, especially in that young of players. But from what we know right now, Tamar Johnson is a once-in-a-generation type talent, according to Ben Badler,
and not just Ben. I mean, MLB Pipeline. Yeah. Who were the 2 comps MLB Pipeline had? I can't remember.
Wade Boggs and Tony Gwynn mix or something.
Yeah, Vlad Sr.
Oh,
that's Vlad Sr. Yeah, it's absurd.
So, yeah, I mean, underslot or overslot, I mean, I don't care. With this last chance probably to have the first pick in the draft, unless you look at some predictions I saw that had the Orioles as the worst record again in 2022, but whatever. Yeah, I think I would do it. I would do Tamar Johnson. And again, that could change, but as of right now. And our last question comes from someone named Rob Raylan, who would like us to predict the Orioles' top 10 prospects this time next year. Just a fun exercise I wanted to go through with and force these guys to do as well. So let's start with Zach.
Is Rob Raylan the name that you use to check into hotels so no one can find you? Because that's really original.
It's very inconspicuous.
All right, so I want to launch this exercise, and this is my very, very early top 10 prediction for 2021. Number 1 is going to be Tamar Johnson. Number 2, Gunnar Henderson. Number 3, DL Hall, who I don't think is going to graduate in 2022, but will come into 2023 as one of the top pitching prospects in the game. Number 4, Kobe Mayo. Number 5, Colton Cowser. Number 6, Jordan Westberg. Number 7, Heston Kjerstad. I went with Connor Norby at 8th. I think the power is going to show up this year, and some of the really bullish, optimistic projections for him are going to be even more valid after a good 2022 season. At number 9, Gene Pinto, of course. He's going to have a big year again, and he's just going to continue to move up this list. And at number 10, I went with Michael Hernandez. I know it's only going to be the FCL, but a lot of people, both inside and outside the Orioles organization, seem pretty high on him. I think he's going to have a good year down in Florida. Maybe like Misael Deschon last year, gets a brief cup of coffee at Del Marva to end the year. I was split between Deschon and Hernandez at 10. And honestly, I could be persuaded that it should be Deschon, but I'm going to stick with Hernandez.
All right, my top 10, looking ahead, I said number 1, don't throw things at me. I said Grayson Rodriguez. I'm going to say he doesn't shake the prospect eligibility this year. I'm looking at the Orioles' past history, their track record, all the craziness going on. I know I want him on opening day on the roster, but I think he sticks around for a little bit longer on the prospect list. So I'm going to say Grayson Rodriguez 1. Number 2, it's going to be 1-1, whoever that may be. 3, I do have Gunnar Henderson. I also have Henderson ahead of jumping DL Hall, who I have at number 4. 5, Colton Cowser. 6, Kobe Mayo. 7, Jordan Westberg. 8, Heston Kjerstad. 9, Connor Norby. And 10, Gene Pinto. Bauman, Stowers, Bradish all graduate as well.
All right. I did a top 15. Sorry. Number 1, Tamar Johnson. Of course. I think that's, if we take him, that talent is there. Number 2, DL Hall. I agree with Zach that he will not graduate this year. And Nick, you might have said that too. Sorry. I was a little distracted for a second. Number 3, Colton Cowser. Number 4, Gunnar Henderson. Number 5, Kobe Mayo. Number 6, Jordan Westberg. 7, Hessen Kerstad. 8, Gene Pinto. There we go. Number 9, Connor Norby. Number 10, Drew Rahm. Number 11, Joey Ortiz. 12, Michael Hernandez. 13, Michelle Dosan. 14, Hudson Haskin. 15, Samuel Basayo.
I like Rahm in the top 10. I considered him too. That's bold, and I like it.
Shout out to Prospects Live, who has Rahm at number 10 right now. They get it. They're my favorite prospect list other than ours. You guys know what's up.
Vivek says, I wonder if Gene Pinto knows how much we love him. He does.
He does.
Don't worry about that.
He does. Trust me.
All right. So before we wrap up here, and I know we've been at this for a while, but Bob, Nick, any last minute questions come to mind here you just feel like throwing out just for the fun of it?
When does spring training start?
Yeah, I was going to say, how much longer until April? Was it 8th, the Tides start? Yeah, that was my question. I'm ready for this. I'm excited.
Spring training will start in the middle of March.
Yeah, I think if the season's going to start on time, they'd have to come to an agreement within the next week, which doesn't seem possible. So yeah, I think you're right.
Nick, you look like you want to say something like kind of bold and disappointing. Are you going to predict that the season's going to get canceled?
No, I froze for a second. I'm good now.
Okay,
you're all good. I got nothing to add. I'm losing more and more hope. Obviously, this season's not going to start on time. I'm just scared of how many games we are going to end up losing. I don't think there's going to be this last second. Here's a rush. We got to start. Let's crack this deal. I don't think that's going to happen. So I'm just looking ahead to minor league baseball. April 8th. Let's go.
Yes, and we are definitely looking forward to the start of the minor league season here at On the Verge. And no, we are not running out of things to cover this winter. As evidenced by the fact we're going to be joined next week by Dr. Stephen Loftus, who's kind of been a regular on this show since we started back in 2020. We know he's one of our listeners' favorite guests. He's going to be coming on to help us preview the high school and college baseball seasons. And we'll get into a little bit of draft lottery talk, too, with him. And as a programming note, we will be on Wednesday next week live. So if you watch this on our live stream, plan to tune in on Wednesday night, the 16th. If you listen to us on podcasts, check whatever the app you listen to your podcast on, either late that night or early the following morning, and our show with Dr. Stephen Loftus will be there. So thank you for listening to tonight's episode. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to On the Verge.
Go Bengals.